A good father is one of the most unsung, unpraised, unnoticed, and yet one of the most valuable assets in our society. Billy Graham. All right. Good morning and welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I'm your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. It is yet again another Friday, another day for Dad Talk. Today, I am happy to bring on Adam Coleman to discuss just being a dad in general. And also, he's written a book. So, we're going to talk a little bit about that. We are going to step away from all the arguing and debating about politics, and we're going to talk dad stuff. So, please give me a warm welcome for Adam as he joins the show. Adam, how are you? It's your mute button on me. I think you might have to unmute yourself, sir. I think you're muted. Let me see here. I don't. No, I don't have a it's muted.
Oh,
No. There it is.
there we go.
Sorry about that.
It's all
I
good.
I think it might be me because, I muted because what happens is when I shift to a different view, it doesn't mute the participants, so you can, like, sit in the background and you could have a hot mic. So I mute it just in case, and then it doesn't give me an option to unmute it, so we're gonna have to reach out to Rumble and be like, "Hey, you guys gotta fix this." All right,
Yeah,
so let's get back to it. Good morning, sir. How are you?
I'm doing good. How about yourself?
I'm doing very well. It is another great Friday, and I'm pleased to have you on this Dad Talk series. So let's get started. Introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, and then we're going to dive into just general dad stuff.
Yeah, I feel like I have 8 jobs. Um, I'm a former IT guy, turned media guy.
Hmm.
Um, I'm the founder of Wrong Publishing. Uh, Now the co-founder of Thirst Entertainment, which is a startup project. It's not yet out, but it's coming
Hmm.
soon. Um, excuse me. I'm a writer for multiple publications, like the New York Post, most notably, but I've written for Newsweek,
Hmm.
Post Millennial, Human Events. Uh, yeah, the list goes on. And I'm also the author of 2 books. First book was Black Victims of Black Victor. The second
Hmm.
book that just came out April 1st, The Children We Left Behind.
Gotcha. So, and you're a dad. If you don't mind, how many kids you have?
I have one.
One.
He's 19.
Okay, awesome. I've one. He's 6, so I got a few
Okay.
years to catch up to you. Um, so I might have to reach out and be like, "Hey, man, what do you think?"
Yeah, definitely.
Hey, and that's one of the reasons that I brought you on the show is because I watched your post. I mean, we got connected through Larry Sharp a while back on his podcast,
Mhm.
and then I can't remember if I was following you before that or not, but I know I was following you after that for sure. And I just watched your post, and I think you've got some great insights as a dad. So I really appreciate like for me, dads is kind of like a passion of mine, not just because I'm a dad, but just because I think the world doesn't really recognize, or at least uh, they kind of diminish the value in some way, either through word or action or whatnot. So I think it's great to have dads out there talking about good dad stuff. What motivated you to start writing?
Well, so the very first thing that I wrote really was the book.
Hmm.
Um, I would go maybe like a year prior. I wanted to write a book as like a legacy thing for my son,
Hmm.
but I didn't know what to write about. I was kind of going through not like a political awakening or anything like that, but just like learning new things, and I realized how some of the things I wasn't questioning, and I wanted to write something about questioning things or something like that. I think I spent like 1 hour attempting to come up with something, and that
Hmm.
was it. But then COVID happens, we're all locked down, George Floyd happens, and everyone loses their mind
Mhm.
completely. Um, and I went on free speech forums to kind of figure out like, am I going crazy or is everybody else going crazy? Am I being ridiculous when it
Mhm.
comes to these narratives, or are they ridiculous? And I found out that they were ridiculous, and I'm not the only one. Which is actually, I think a lot of people downplay. Like, it's always good to know you're not the only one going through something.
Mhm.
Um, so from there, I started expressing myself in these free speech forums, and unsolicited, people would reach out to me. There was like maybe 3 or 4 people would send me DMs like, "Hey, you should write more often.
Mhm.
Like, how you explained yourself is really good." And one of them actually was a pastor out in Illinois, and I don't know, it just clicked one day. I was like, I think this is it. I think this is the thing I was supposed to write about. So initially, I was just like, let me write about race. That was basically my starting point. And then from there, I just kind of figured out like what were the central points that I wanted to highlight. Um, and ultimately, the book on the surface is about race, and there are some things that are topical to race.
Mhm.
But the most important elements of the book are talking about family and how we interact in our relationships.
Mhm.
But I also talk about victimhood and things of that nature. Excuse me, which are things that not just Black people, but all people experience to some degree. It's very easy to lean into victimhood narratives to make the other person more responsible for yourself than yourself.
Right.
Um, so yeah, that's how I started, and then from there, so people understand. Like, I wasn't on social media; I didn't really use it. I had a Facebook, but it was like for friends and family, and I
Mhm.
didn't really use it. Um, Maybe to like private message um, some people, but that was about it. I didn't post my feelings; I kept it to myself. Um, so I published a book. Was it March of 2021? And I sent out some emails to some podcasts to see if they wanted to hear what I had to say and check out the book.
Mhm.
And then from there, August of 2021 was when I like actually like started using Twitter.
Mhm.
Um, and then from there, I think it took me a year to reach 100,000 followers. And all these opportunities opened up for me as a writer. And I made a major transition to do more of this kind of full time thing. And I've traveled to different parts of the country. I've spoken at conventions. I'm actually going to Freedom Fest. I don't know if you'll be there.
I
Uh,
won't. I did not plan appropriately. I have to start, like, looking ahead and finding these events and then working out, and right now, like, there's just so much going on. I have not had a chance to do any of that, so
yeah, no, it's okay. But I get it. But I'll be at Freedom Fest. I'll finally be on the main stage,
nice.
um, and talking about fatherhood on Father's Day, if I remember correctly. So
Oh, wow, that's cool.
yeah,
That's cool.
so sorry for my throat. I feel dry all of a sudden.
It's all good. So when you're, uh, this first book that you wrote,
Mhm.
who is the? Because I haven't read your books and I'll do apologies.
No problem.
What is, who is the audience for that first book?
Everyone.
Everyone?
That's the
Okay.
thing. Yeah.
It's not I'm a
So
black man writing to the black community, it's I'm a black man writing about race to everyone.
right,
Gotcha. Okay.
exactly.
And
Because
go
there
ahead.
are elements within the book
Mhm.
that, and I do this purposefully, and I've had people tell me like your book on the surface seems like it's going to be what everyone expects, but when you start to read it, you're like, oh no, this is much deeper, and it's actually more broad than people realize. So yes, there are elements where I'm criticizing like certain cultural aspects, but I'm criticizing it in a way that anyone can understand,
Mhm.
because they'll be like, "Oh, like my group does this thing too." And
Mm.
then there's stuff where I talk about like childhood development, um, and the impact of not having um, solid family units. And I don't use race when I'm talking about those things. And so at the end of the book, I'm essentially saying like, unfortunately, we have more. in common than we do different when it comes to this issue of family separation.
Mhm.
And this is actually something that we can unify over and try to resolve, essentially. And I give a story of um, an older white man that I came across online. He was a veteran, and you on the surface it looks like we had completely different lives, but we unified over our issue of family separation. He doesn't even know who his father is,
Mhm.
and he spent much of his adult years lost. Went into the military because he didn't know what else to do.
Mhm.
Um, Bounced around from country to country, trying to figure out who he was because he didn't know part of his identity. Unfortunately for him, he got into alcohol, and that affected his relationship with his kids and things of that nature. But um, you know, I understood where he was coming from. Like, I understood why he felt the way that he did, why he felt so lost.
I gotcha. That's pretty and then your second book, which I don't have the title in front of me. Do I think I do.
uh, the
Um,
children we left behind.
yeah, The Children I had my notes here somewhere, and I set it aside somewhere. The Children We Left Behind. Um, so and the motivation for this book, and then what is this? Tell us about this book.
Yeah. So the motivation for this book kind of stemmed from me running for different publications, and I would see these different news stories, and whether it be like mass shootings or something of that effect. And I would always look. I'm like, well, what's their upbringing like?
Mhm.
And really, all of them came from either divorce, single parent home, or foster care. Um, and I was like, all right, I think that's significant that all of these stories have like a very common link. And then you start looking at all these major social issues, and the common link is the same thing. I do use a story of Jordan Neely, who's the
Mhm.
homeless man uh, who had died on the subway just a few years ago. I think it was a few years ago. I don't know. Time is flying by.
Right.
Um, but while everybody was focused on that story of him dying, I wanted to focus on him as a kid because it was high profile. There's a lot of information that did come out about him and him as a child. His birth father, wasn't really involved in his life. He grew up in a home with his mother and a stepfather, and his stepfather had murdered his mother.
Mhm.
Um, After she was murdered, from my understanding, he had to bounce around in different places, but ended up in foster care. While he was in foster care, he had to testify against him for the trial, for the murder trial. So all of these things are very traumatic events for any kid to go through.
Mhm.
And then on top of that, being abandoned in the foster care system, um, we learn more about him being in the foster care system actually from his foster brother, who was very heartbroken to hear that he had died. And another thing, and this is like part of my issue with the media, is like whenever you try to paint a narrative about somebody, if they're a good guy, you always have to find the best light possible, and you ignore everything else. And so what they tried to do was say he just liked to dress like Michael Jackson and dance on subways.
Right.
And I was like, well, no, he was dressing up like Michael Jackson and dancing on the subways because he was in a foster home and they weren't feeding them.
Mhm.
And he was dancing for money, and not just for himself, but for his foster brother. And his foster brother was saying, I would be there with him, and he would make enough money where we could get food together. But he always made sure that I ate before he did. So he cared very deeply about his foster brother, especially because his foster brother was a little bit younger than him.
Mhm.
So, you have like a very multifaceted look at this individual. Now, after foster care, he aged out of the foster system and ended up on the streets,
Mhm.
and the rest is history. Of course, of course, he has mental issues. His mother was murdered, and
Mhm.
he was been tossed around, and he was in an abusive home. Like that causes all types of issues for any kid. And to just get left behind and tossed to different places and home to home, and no one really cares about you, end up on the street. wouldn't you be mad at society too
Right.
when every adult in your life seems to disappoint you? So, you know, I'm not saying that it's right. I'm just saying when someone says on a subway card just before they die, I don't care if I go to jail or not. That should tell you everything. That
Right.
life is miserable no matter if I'm free, metaphorically free, physically free, or not.
Right.
Um, that's a person who does not care about themselves. They've given up hope.
Mhm.
And so that's what ended up happening. He ended up dying because of him not having any hope and going after or threatening these people, not caring about the consequences, not knowing that this guy's a Marine and might actually take him down or anything
Mhm.
like that.
Right.
So, you know, his life is very complicated, but it's very easy to just look at the very end of someone's life. What I'm trying to do is look at the very beginning
Mhm.
because what I've learned, especially as a parent, is that at those beginning points is when you're building up habits for kids. And so, which with each activity that happens or each traumatic event that happens to them, they're learning lessons about the world and they carry those things with them. And when they become adults, they just become adults who have learned repetitive behaviors, life lessons about the world. And it is really hard for them to change their mindset and really hard for them to have some sort of belief when every adult figure has either abused you physically, has neglected you in some sort of capacity, to go out into the world and think that other adults won't do the same. And so, yeah, like this is what we're modeling for many of our youth.
Mhm.
Um, so that's an extreme circumstance. Obviously, that's not most kids who grow up in that situation, but it's a reality that is faced, and there is a reason why he ended up where he ended up.
Mhm.
And so, what I also try to do in the book is say that while his situation is extreme, there are more benign situations in comparison to his, like mine, where I grew up without my father and how it impacted me, and how there are many moments where I could have ended my life because of what I was going through.
Right.
And that is far more common. And that is because it's so far more common, it's detrimental. So I talk very deeply and personally about what it was like for me as a kid and what my mindset was and how I saw the world, and how I struggled through many things.
Is there much of a difference when you're looking at these kind of stories and you're looking at the stories like Jordan Neely and maybe
Mhm.
some more benign ones which are more common, and then when you reflect on your own life, is there a difference for you between looking at that from the lens of Adam the writer and Adam the now well, maybe not now dad because it's 19 years in, but,
Mhm.
Adam the dad? Is there much of a difference, or is it basically one and the same?
I would say it's one and the same.
Mhm.
I tend to be a compassionate person. That's generally my nature.
Mhm.
Um, and so especially like so there's an era of obviously becoming a father, and you gain some compassion and understanding, so you can raise a child. But I just turned 40 last year, and I also was baptized last year,
Okay.
and those were like I was literally like a month apart with me
Mhm.
being baptized and turning 40. So I'm not sure which one was the turning point for me, but I've become even more compassionate and even more understanding about how difficult life is and how not everything is black and white, and that some people say ridiculous or do ridiculous things because they're suffering.
Mhm.
Um, and and it's very easy. And listen, I'm not saying like people shouldn't be punished. You break the law,
Right.
you do the time, that kind of thing. But I also recognize that like it's not in a vacuum. There are people who are suffering, and this is the outcome of their suffering. They're making
Right.
choices based off of their suffering. You know, we use like um, and actually, this is part of the problem with this is the libertarian aspect. This is the problem with government, is that people think that government can fix all issues, including
Mhm.
very complex social issues.
Right.
And so they throw money at homelessness, thinking that the issue is that they don't have a home, rather than a slew of complex issues that even led to them ending up on the streets, which for many of them, it was voluntary
Right.
that they ended up on the streets, and they, or at least voluntary that they want to stay on the streets.
Mhm.
Um, and one thing I've learned is that for very hard drug users, many of them, I don't know if I should say most, but let's say many of them start using drugs when they're teenagers or sometimes younger if it's
Right.
if they have access to it. So they either start drinking or using drugs when they're very young. And so the question is, all right, why would a teenager use drugs or alcohol excessively?
Mhm.
Right? It's one thing to experiment, take a sip of a beer, or your friend gives you a joint and you smoke it once, whatever. But I'm talking about excessively, so much so that their entire lives has been about consuming something. And so, what's the reason why they would take it is to escape. To
Mhm.
escape what? Why would a kid feel the need to escape? And it's because something is happening at the home. And for many of them, either they're coming from foster care system where no one gives a shit about them, or they're in households where they're being physically and sexually abused.
Mhm.
And I would I think people would be very shocked if they had open, honest conversations with people, even men who are locked up in prison, and asked them about if they face some sort of sexual abuse. They
Right.
would be very, very shocked to know that many of them have been.
Right. Well, I think
And
that's
yeah,
the reason why that often you hear about, like, child abusers go to jail and tend not to make it or have a very, very rough time.
mhm,
And one of the things that I've heard is that a lot of inmates were abused themselves, and that, on top of the fact that they find it, like, hey, they have a line, they
mhm,
also were abused, and so you add those 2 together, and this person's a criminal. Um, it's a very dangerous situation for, child abusers to head to jail.
yeah.
So I agree with you. I'm just kinda chiming in there.
No, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's definitely something there. I'll tell you, I met a detective who works for the NYPD, and he was talking about how you arrest a perp, and maybe they have to go to the hospital, or
Mhm.
there's like almost like downtime of like processing paperwork and stuff like that. You're just kind of waiting around, and so they get into conversations with the perps, and they're just talking to them. And he told me, he's like, you would not believe how many young black men were sexually abused when they were children. Like, he was like, it was just so common just to have these discussions, and then they would tell him, which means that if they're telling a stranger, especially like a cop who's arresting them, that
Mhm.
they were sexually abused, to me that says that no one else has given them the time or cared enough to hear them out, hear
Mhm.
what they're going through, and that they haven't resolved, or I don't know if you can resolve it, but like they haven't worked through so they can move forward in life. It's something that keeps them stuck. It's affecting them.
Right.
Um, and you add all these things up. People are functionally stuck as children mentally. And
Mhm.
for the drug users, I was talking about, when they start consuming drugs at a very young age, what they're
Mhm.
essentially doing is stunting their brain development.
Mhm.
And so that's why, even if someone stops taking drugs, let's say at the age of 30, they've been doing drugs for almost 20 years, 15 years, what happens is that their brain still hasn't fully developed
Mhm.
because they interrupted it with taking narcotics. And so they're still highly impulsive. They still don't make good decisions. They can't see the consequences like around the corner, like a normal functioning adult who has normal brain development can. They're functionally teenagers. So they could be 40 years old, but you're watching them and like, why'd you make that dumb decision? And it's because their brain still hasn't fully developed. They stunted their growth. So that's another hurdle that they have to find. So, I mean, especially when you're dealing with drug users who are consuming these things, like they don't, people underplay how much that stuff wrecks your mind
Mhm.
and how much that messes up what you have going on. And this also comes into a play while I'm all about mental health. It's people talk about mental health and drugs as if
Mhm.
they don't coincide with each other. I'm sorry if you're taking mind altering drugs
Mhm.
consistently, that messes with your mental health.
Right.
so so it's not like oh, he just takes drugs all the time, but he has mental health issues. It's like no, he has mental health issues likely because he's been consuming drugs. Like that stuff messes with your brain. That's
Right.
why they're taking it. So they can forget or so they can go to an alternate state. But that has negative ramifications.
Right. So let me shift gears here now. Now that we've kind of got this underlying basis for you turning to writing and, what you've written about, kind of like backtrack a little bit.
Mhm.
All these things that you've observed, that some of them that you've personally experienced, whether it was your own personal experiences or experiences, with somebody else talking to them and such. How has that impacted you as a dad? Like, what kind of things do you think? Because and I agree with you. When you become a dad or
Mhm.
parent in general, but we're on dad talk. When you become a dad, you change. Hopefully for the better. I think
Yeah.
usually. I know that I personally have, um, like, if you had asked me a few years ago, "Hey, should we, get rid of the death penalty?" I would have been like, "No," because I'd have been more on the conservative side, right? Like probably
Mhm.
10 years ago. Today, I'm more libertarian, and libertarians tend to oppose the death penalty. We don't need to get into the reasons why, but they tend to. Um, However, when it comes to children, I'm like, yeah, that's kind of my exception. Of like, if you harm children, I'm kind of okay with it in this particular,
Yeah.
and I become more sensitive to harm towards children having become a dad. Now, I don't think that's from any experiences prior. That's just just as a dad. So I think being a dad changes you in some ways.
Yeah.
I look at my son and I don't want him to be upset. I don't want him, but I also have to balance like, okay, this time you kind of earned it. Like we're just gonna have to, let it play out. So how have these things like affected you as a dad? What kind of when you look at being a dad, how do you think they've impacted you in the way that you raise your son, right? Yeah, I think you said your
Yeah.
son.
Well, keep in mind, like when I started doing this, my son was already a teenager. So it's like
Right.
it's a little bit different.
Mhm.
I learned a lot. I'll say this. I learned a lot about raising my son and the impact that I was having for my son by comparing how he's responding to me
Mhm.
raising him versus how I was as a kid who didn't have a father. Um, and for my son's age, he's way ahead,
Mhm.
like in maturity, understanding, confidence, all these different aspects. The list can go on. He's way ahead at the age of 19 than I was at the age of 19.
Mhm.
And it's not to say that my son didn't have like moments of struggle,
Sure,
but
sure, yeah.
every kid's gonna have that.
Right, right.
But the difference was that I didn't have that male figure to be like, it's okay, it's all right, I got your back.
Mhm.
We'll work through it together. What do you need?
Mhm.
I didn't have that. So many of the mistakes that I had, I was always, some kids are more external, they
Mhm.
punch holes in the wall if they're frustrated. I was internal, right? I was critical of myself, and I didn't have anyone to correct that. I didn't have anyone to talk to about that. At least like another male figure to talk about that.
Mhm.
Um and I didn't at the time, just being honest, I didn't feel comfortable sharing these things with my mother either. So, I mostly kept it to myself.
Mhm.
And because I didn't have that correction, I ate at my confidence as a kid. My son doesn't have that because I was always checking up to make sure he's okay. I was
Mhm.
always asking him, like, "You all right? You want to talk about? You want to talk about anything?" I was always sharing, like, when my son had his first little girlfriend, and he was young, girlfriend.
Right, right.
But
Yeah.
but after she broke up with him, I could see how it was affecting him. And I
Right.
said, "Hey man, it's okay." Like, and we just had that conversation. Like, I remember the first time, my first
Yeah.
breakup, and I was talking to him about that. So at least he knows he's not alone.
Mhm.
And he's like, "Okay, like this isn't abnormal. It's not like I'm some freak it he's understanding like, okay, stuff happens. This is part
Mhm.
of life.
Right.
And my dad is there to support me through this entire endeavor. So he my son is able to take things in stride because life is complicated. Things are going to go in ways that you don't want it to go.
Mhm.
Some things you have no control over, but the things you do have control over, you need to take control of those things and keep running with the ball.
Right.
Um, so I guess without me rambling too much, I think that the what I learned a lot was in comparison to my son, and as he got older, I really saw like how far ahead he was and how important I am to his development. Not to say that I didn't understand, but it's like it's one thing to understand, it's another thing to see it.
Mhm.
Um, and I think it was my wife at the time when we were dating. She's like, your son watches you,
Mhm.
and she meant it like literally. He is watching you,
Right.
you know, and it's like, huh, and you know it, but you don't really like think about it. Think about it,
Yeah. Yeah, my
and
wife has had
so
to make that comment to me a few times. She's like, he's watching." I mean, not that I'm doing anything crazy, but just like, "Hey, is that the kind of behavior that you really want him to at least, at this current age emulate?" It's a little
right,
different when they get older and they can kind of understand if dad's just, having a bad day or being sarcastic or various other things.
right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so I think what really shaped me being the parent that I am today was going back to when I was a kid and just trying to become the father that I would have wanted.
Mhm.
So, a father who was understanding, that wasn't like super judgmental,
Mhm.
that taught things and
Mhm.
demonstrated things, um, that was always available. So now that he's 19, it's a little bit different. I know you said you have, was a 6 year old, you said?
6, yeah.
Okay. Um, what I've learned having a child that's an adult is that you go from like having to tell them everything to do to becoming like a mentor.
Mhm.
Like you wait for them to call you and they'll
Right.
call you. If you developed a good relationship, which I have, and we have a very open, honest relationship, he knows he can ask me any question and I'll give him an honest answer. Like I don't BS him. And he
Mhm.
knows that. Um, it reminds me when COVID kicked off, he was like, his mother was worried, and he came to me. He's like, "Dad, should I be worried about this?" And I was like, "No. Here's why."
Right.
And I broke it down to him, and he was like, "Okay, that's what I thought." You
Right.
know, and it's that type of thing where he knows he can come to me, and I'll be honest with him, and I'll be reassuring, and and um, and he can take that information and run with it. So
Right.
that's what it's been like so far. I would even say since he was like 17. When he started driving, he
Mhm.
was working a lot. Um, he was very much so independent. He's doing his thing. Now he's like, "I'll let you know when I can stop by, Dad." And it's like,
Right.
"All right, that's what it is now." So,
Right. When I started this podcast, kind of, I don't write, and maybe I'll write a book someday, but when I started the podcast, one of my thoughts one, I wanted to talk about liberty in general, just because I like to talk, and if you ask my wife, she'll tell you that I really like to talk. Um, but I specifically was like, thinking about what is it that I want to talk about? How do I want to present myself? And I kind of came up with this notion. I was like, I'm getting ready to have a child because the idea was born right before my son was born.
mm,
And so I was like, well, I'm going to be teaching, and for the purposes of speaking in terms of dad, because I'm not excluding my wife here, but I was like, I'm going to be teaching my son everything he learns. And so what do I want him to be like when he's 19? And what you described is exactly what I want. I want him to feel comfortable to always be able to come to me and say, "All right, dad, what do you think about this?" And it's not in the sense of, "Okay, I better go see if it's okay or good or bad from dad." Just, I'm curious what dad thinks. That's
right,
it. And maybe when my son is 19, he'll ask me something and then he will agree with it. And maybe he won't. Maybe he'll say, I don't think you were very convincing, dad. And that's cool too. But I always want him to feel comfortable to come to me when he has a question, if he feels it. Right. And the way that I do that is by preparing now.
Yeah.
So like initially my tagline was preparing for tomorrow's conversation by how we behave today. That was initially my little tagline that I used because I was like, look, if he's 19 and he doesn't ever want to talk to me, that's because all those years leading up to 19, I screwed up, you know? But if he does want to talk to me, then I've done at least a decent job at a minimum. So I
Yeah.
think it's interesting. I got a question for you because you said something that really caught my attention a moment ago. And you said, when you're engaging with your son, you wanna make sure that he never feels like he's alone, even if it's something, that we might take for granted now that we're married. We've been married for many years, and we're like, "Oh, you got your first girlfriend. How cute or adorable," or whatever, whatever terminology we use. But then the breakup happens, and then, like, that's a rough thing for them because it's the first one they've ever been through.
Right.
Um, so do you think for many men, especially those who have grown up without the joy of having a father. Maybe that's one of the big missing things is that they didn't get to experience, "Hey, here's somebody that's making sure I never feel alone." Do you think that's a big problem?
Oh yeah, for sure. Um, I'll say this as a guy who I consume all types of media.
Mhm.
And throughout my life, I've consumed media that you'd be like, "You watch that?"
Oh,
Yes,
yeah,
I
I
watched that.
people don't even like, I'm just gonna go ahead and consider you another fellow Liberty dad, right?
Mhm.
Um, and people don't understand, like, these Liberty dads, we know stuff, maybe stuff we shouldn't know.
Right. Um, so with that being said, like I've also consumed manosphere content,
Mhm.
or red pill, whichever term
Right,
you want to
right.
use. And I consumed it especially during the pandemic. So I would watch it and actually I found that there were aspects of it that even for me as an adult, I
Mhm.
was like, you know what? That's a really good point. Like
Right.
there there are aspects of it that actually helped me, that improved me as a man, and actually
Mhm.
led to conversations with my wife at the time we were dating. And it
Mhm.
led to us having conversations and discussing things.
Mhm.
And she might disagree and we would talk about it. Um, and that was the type of thing that really helped me. And I later realized like the parts of it that were good. Like
Mhm.
now it's a complete shit show. Now it's just now
Right.
it's just entertainment and it's
Yeah.
just exaggerated nonsense. But the aspects that are good, I realized were things that your father would tell you.
Mm.
You know, it was typical wisdom, um, that a that a father would tell his child, and then it made me think, all right, if people are finding this beneficial,
Mhm.
and let's specify, if men are finding this beneficial,
Right.
and I'm one of those guys who finds it beneficial, and it's mostly because I didn't have a father figure in my life who told me these things and or who accentuated these points, and that's why I struggled so much, or that's why I didn't have success, maybe with women at certain point, or
Mhm.
or I wasn't getting the relationship outcomes that I wanted. If that's why, then man, are how many of these other men are getting the same exact feeling that I'm getting
Mhm.
because they didn't have anyone to teach them these things?
Right.
And I think that that's the underlying thing about manosphere content that I don't think people understand is that people are consuming it for a reason. Like everyone does
Right.
something for a reason. They're taking something from it.
Right.
Um, so if they're watching antagonistic content, made by men ridiculing women, well, why are they consuming that? And it's because they're frustrated. Not saying it's a good thing, but they're frustrated for some sort of reason,
Mhm.
which I think some of that content basically leads into victim ideology, right? The reason they're unsuccessful with women is not because of them, not because they need to improve themselves, which every man can improve himself. I'm always improving myself, but it's not that. It's the women. There's something wrong with the women,
Right.
and it just goes down this list. So that is telltale victim ideology. In the same way with feminism, the reason why you're not getting the pay that you want, or the reason why you're not getting the man that you want, is because there's something wrong with the men,
Mhm.
and it's the inverse. So
Right.
when you start going down the route of victim ideology, that's when you get stuck.
Mhm.
right? Because you don't improve yourself, you don't develop yourself. And it's not to say that some of the things that they're saying are wrong. It's
Right.
that they exaggerate the blame,
Mhm.
essentially. And then on top of that, they use horror stories, which, as someone who works in the media, I can easily lead my audience to think something
Mhm.
by finding enough news stories, which there are billions upon billions of people that exist in this world, and there are terrible things that have happened in recent years, in present day, all over the world. And so, if I want to paint a narrative about a specific group, regardless of what that group is, I can easily do that.
Mhm.
That's not the hard part. And so when people finally understand that you can easily be misled, you can easily be shown that um, you can easily be manipulated into not improving yourself by
Mhm.
pointing the finger at someone else with propaganda, because
Right.
it's endless. So if I want to say that women are bad, I have endless examples, especially with TikTok and all types of stuff. Like,
Right.
everyone gets on TikTok, including the bad women. I
Right.
can show that all day long. See, guys, you don't have to do as much. You don't have to do the heavy lifting. There's
Mhm.
something wrong with the women. Be nihilistic about the world, But that's that. But I do think that the manosphere content, when I was consuming it, I would say about 50% of it was beneficial. The other 50% were entertainment. Now it seems to be 90% entertainment, 10% beneficial.
Right. And I think what if I were to be answering, if like somebody asked me like, what do you think one of the big problems here is, like you're talking, I think that there's the big need for a dad is to say, okay, yes, this thing has happened to you. Maybe it's your fault, maybe it's not. But at the end of the day, you're the one that has to deal with it. And
Right,
this is a message that I've, like, when I used to mentor kids, like they would be like, "Well, this is not my fault." And I'm like, "Okay, sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't," like, and I'm like, "It doesn't really matter. Like, you're the one that has to deal with this." Right? Like
right,
if you got fired because, there was a car wreck and you were late to work even though maybe you left on time, the fact of the matter is you have to deal with the fact that you lost a job. You can't complain and say, well, it's all the employer's fault. It's all the drivers that, wrecked each other. Like, because if you just keep blaming them, the problem doesn't get solved.
right.
And I think that's where we come in as dads and say, "No." Like, yes, we can acknowledge maybe it's not your fault, but no, you have to deal with it. It's your problem to deal with. So figure it out, right?
And in that example that you just gave, if you're getting fired because of that wreck,
Mhm.
likely that wasn't the first time you were late.
Right. 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 Yeah, I've
So
met
you have
plenty of
to
those people.
right. So you got to
Yeah.
go back and say, well, you know what? I could have been on time more often, so that when I did face that
Yeah.
wreck, they'd be like, "Oh, it's all good. He
Right.
normally shows up on time."
Right. Yeah, there's a fun story when I was working at Burger King when I was in my 20s. I showed up late to work, and me and this manager were continually clashing. We were having a big problem, and I showed up late to work, and he pulled me aside, and he's like, "Dan," he's like, I'm told that you're never ever late. In fact, you're always early." He's like, "Something wrong?" Now, mind you, I was in my 20s, and so I was like, "Yeah, something is wrong, actually. I don't like working here anymore, and today's my last day." So, not advice. I would not give that advice to do that. I would
Right.
say if you're a young person, do not do that. I did that. There could be consequences for pulling a stunt like that. But the fact is, my reputation of being on time and, in fact, generally early, raised a flag that one time that I was late. So you are right. I've met so many people that are like, I got fired because I went to my grandma's funeral. Like, really? Is that why you got fired? No, it's not.
Right. Yeah, that was
So,
the final straw.
let me ask a question here. So somebody's throwing much of the chat is just people talking to themselves, amongst themselves. But there's an interesting question here. Um, that Liberty Lady says, Adam, since your son is older, what are his plans for his career? And then I want to add to that, and like, what role did you play in those plans?
So I will say this: the only thing I've ever been worried about, and I'm being sincere when I say this,
Hmm.
wasn't worried about his little kid years, wasn't
Mhm.
worried about the teenage years. Matter of fact, I guess I'm the odd parent. I was looking forward to the teenage years because for me, when I was a kid, I was like, I wish someone told me things
Mhm.
to prepare me for the world. I'm at my last steps before entering the world. So
Right.
I couldn't wait to the teenage years. So I was never worried about any of that stuff. The only thing I was worried about was college. That
Mhm.
was the only thing I was worried about because how I saw how we were misleading kids, and I
Mhm.
saw in many ways how we're scamming kids into chasing hopes that are unrealistic,
Mhm.
or at least not having them understand the gravity of taking out $80,000 to $120,000 in school debt to chase something that will make you 20,000.
Right.
like just stuff like that.
Right.
So I was always when he was in his younger teen years, I would always tell him the truth. That was like, if you love your kids, you just tell them the truth. So I always told him the truth. I'm like, if you want to go to college, I'm all for it.
Mhm.
But you need to understand what's at play. And especially when he started working, he started seeing how much money, like when he would get $300 in his check, he's like, okay, that seems like a lot of money to me because I've
Mhm.
never made money.
Right.
But when I compare it to how much is it to get an apartment,
Mhm. Mhm. Right.
how much is it to have a car? Like, what does it compare to actual like adult responsibilities? It's not a
Right.
lot. And so when you take that $300 and someone says you have to pay $80,000, you're
Right.
like, whoa, hold on a second. Like
Right.
he was making the connection. Like that is a lot of money.
Mhm.
That's a lot to risk. And we would have this dialogue. So for a while, he actually didn't want to go to college. He actually wanted to be an artist and go to Japan and do more Japanese style art.
Okay.
And I was honest with him there. I was like, "Listen, if you want to do that, I will support you. But just understand, you're coming in as a foreigner. You
Mhm.
don't speak the
Mhm.
language. So you have a big hurdle. So you can try I'll pay for lessons and help you to learn the language and I will support you any which way possible." And in the back of my head, I knew it was like, he's probably not going to do it.
Right.
But
Right.
I want to show support because
Mhm.
if he does do it, at least he knows his father supports him. And
Right.
you know what? If he goes to Japan, and I've told him this, if you go to Japan and it doesn't work out, what do you come back when you're 20? Okay. Like, then you pick up and do the thing that the next thing that works. Like,
Right.
you're young enough to do these things. I think sometimes we put so much on these kids' shoulders to make them figure out what they're going to do for the rest of their lives at the age
Right.
of 17.
Yeah.
And there are people who are grown ass men who can't figure out what exactly they want to do because life is complicated and it's difficult. Like we don't figure everything out so quickly.
Right.
So
And things change.
yeah, and things change. Like look at me. I'm essentially switching professions. Um Started doing that in my 30s.
Right.
So and I've met many other people who've done much of the same. So I never tried to make him feel like you got to make a choice for the rest of your life right now. I was just like, if you mess up, man, pick it up and do something else. Like it's
Right.
okay. So before and by the way, so people understand, there's a lot of chaos that was happening at his school, especially with the pandemic, and he was going to a rough school.
Mhm.
I took him out of the school the last couple years. We did homeschooling. um, on his own, he was like, "I'm gonna get my GED." So he got his GED so he can move on
Mhm.
with the things that he wanted to do. Now he wants to go to school because we also talked about the trades. So now he wants to go to school to be an electrician.
Oh,
But
fun.
in the meantime, he's been working. He's
Mhm.
been working this entire time. He's working at a restaurant.
Mhm.
He's earning money. He's working hard. He's gaining work ethic. So all that stuff will translate once he gets into his next profession. But he wants to um, probably will start this fall. But once
Right.
again, he's 19. I didn't yell at him like, you gotta get something now. I was just like, figure your life out and
Right.
go at a pace that you feel comfortable with. And I'm actually kind of glad that he didn't just jump into something. Like
Mhm.
he's taken the time to work, to gain responsibility, to earn some money, to see what he actually wants, to talk to
Mhm.
people, not just to like rush into something because he's trying to satisfy his parents, which a lot of kids do.
Right.
And I think a lot of parents put so much pressure on their kids. Like, you can't take a year off. Like, what's a year? Like,
Right.
like, let them travel, let them get a job, let them
Right.
see
Right.
the world. So yeah, my son, he wanted to. He's been working, and now he's looking to go to school.
Yeah, I think you're correct, and like you, I actually in the mid-30s, I shifted careers.
Mhm.
Um, I was in warehousing, and then, that was also when I met my now wife, and she got a job opportunity, so she moved out of the city that we were both living in, and so then I had a choice to make, and, we decided that we wanted to live a life together, and so I said at the same time, I happened to be connecting with people in technology, and they were encouraging me to learn software development or web development more specifically, and so I was like, "Yeah, I'll pursue that," and so when I moved down here to Jacksonville with her, I actually ended up taking a whole year off in my 30s so that I
Mm.
could study software development. And then once I decided I was ready, I went and I got a job and, I've been doing, technology and, since. And so I think there's this if you have a specific goal like that requires maybe a long time, like if you're like, I want to be president of the United States, just to make a really easy example. If you're like, I want to be a president, well, yeah, then probably you should start early. And there are certain things that you probably are going to want to start doing, more specifically. But if you're like, I'm not really sure what I want to be, I want to be maybe an artist, or maybe I want to be an electrician, or you know what, this seems kind of fun. Well, I think in your 20s, like if you're going to experiment, of all things that kids experiment with, doing different jobs is probably a good one, right?
Yeah,
Like that seems to me, go figure it out. And I also point out, I think that's the time for kids to make mistakes. If
yeah,
you're 40 and you can't get to work on time, that's a problem. If you're 20 and you can't get to work on time, that's still a problem, but the magnitude of it is so much smaller because you can afford to make mistakes at that point. And
yeah.
okay, I was being boneheaded. Now I've learned my lesson. Okay, I'll get my act together at the ripe old age of 22, right? Like something like that. So yeah, I agree with you. Our time is winding down, so I want to get to kind of, I don't want to call it my favorite part of the show, but it's kind of a fun part.
Mhm.
So what I do, and I told you this before the show. So for listeners and people that are watching, what I like to do is I like to go through the dad groups on Facebook and pull something interesting, and then just ask the dad that's on the show and say, "Hey, what are your thoughts on this?" It's kind of because the whole point of this show is to raise dad voices, and it's to like let the world know, like, hey, dads are important. We have good things to say, and just kind of give some positivity in the world of dads,
Right.
without beating up on women. So I'm not really the, I got to go and talk trash about feminism and all that. So this is just yet another way to raise a dad voice. So let me put this up on the screen here, and it takes me a second because, let's see here. Where is it? There it is. Okay. So boom. Let's see here. And I think I got to click this button. Is it this one? No. Where is it here? It's always so difficult to get it up. Oh, I got to figure out how to get it on the screen now. There it is. Okay. All right. So I'm going to read this out loud for everybody, and then maybe you can see it. Okay, dads, I'm in a huge freaking dilemma. My 10-year-old daughter came home from school yesterday and told me that now has a girlfriend. My daughter is in fifth grade. This other girl is in sixth. I'm not sure how to handle this personally. I'm not sure how to handle this. Personally, think this is too young of an age to be doing this. Any ideas on what to do? Do I tell her, no, that is not acceptable for your age, or do I just let it play out? Either way, I want to be supportive. So, what say you, fellow dad?
That is a interesting one because I think it depends on what your relationship is with your child already.
Hmm.
Um, so the fact that she told her dad that
Hmm.
she has a girlfriend could indicate that it's not a secret.
Right.
But at the same time, I know that some kids who don't have the greatest of relationships with their parents,
Hmm.
not to say that their parents are bad people, they're not seeing eye to eye, so to speak.
Hmm.
They might tell them to get a reaction out of them.
Hmm.
Um, and so it's kind of hard for me to give an answer because I don't know the relationship with them. So I'll just say if my son was a girl and had a girlfriend, I'll just try to use that as an example. Um, One, I would need to know more about like what does this mean?
Mhm.
Um, and but at the same time, I'm very honest. So I'm like, if I think that my daughter has been living a particular way that indicates that she's this straight girl, I'd be like, no, you're not.
Right, right,
I was like, really? I don't think so.
right,
They're like, so, but it wouldn't be a shock to them that their dad is telling them that, right? So
right,
they wouldn't be like, I can't believe you said that.
right.
I would, at that point, she's had 10 years of her dad being very honest with her
Mhm.
and being like, I think this is a phase. I don't think this is real. But I also know at the back of my head, this isn't going to last. You're
Mhm.
10.
Right, right,
Um, but I would also want to know, like, what does this look like? Like, is she actually doing something sexual with this girl? Like, is it like inappropriate? Or is it like, I have these confusing feelings. I
mm,
really like this girl, and maybe I actually like her like like a friend, like something strong like a friend, but I'm
mhm.
10 years old and I'm confusing feelings.
Right, right,
Right? So I need to know, what does this entail? Like, what are you guys doing? Are you kissing or are you just googly eyeing? Like,
right,
I need to know what this looks like. So I don't have a solid answer because I don't want to put like, if this happens, you do this. I
right.
think there are, what's the relationship like with between the father and the daughter? Um, what's the level of honesty the father has with the daughter? Um, like, I think those key things are important, but at the very least, the father needs to know, what does this entail as far as activity? Because to be honest with you, if she came home and said, I have a boyfriend, I would also be like, okay, what does that entail? What are y'all
Right,
doing? You
right.
know? And if it seems very sexual for a 10-year-old, then I'd be very concerned. So it's not just that it's, a lesbian relationship versus a straight relationship. It's, is my daughter being inappropriately sexual?
Mhm.
Or is this kid shit where they're just
Right,
like, I like this person. I like being
right.
around this person. And, you know, I guess you could be my girlfriend. That's kind of different. I don't know.
Mhm.
So I wouldn't panic unless you find out that it is a highly inappropriate situation. But I do think that kids are curious.
Right.
And especially, and I don't know what school she goes to. I don't know what kind of, books were given to her or what was said to these kids or anything like that. There's the LGBT thing is something that's more widely spoken about. So I don't know what she's consumed. I don't know if this is like, well, she saw that these other girls are girlfriends, and so she's just mimicking them. Like,
Right, right,
there are a lot of details. I wouldn't run to, well, I guess my daughter's a lesbian.
right.
Like, I wouldn't run to that conclusion. Um, kids are kids often are trying things and they're learning things that they don't fully understand. And
Right.
it's not that you just become this willing participant and just like, okay, well, whatever she wants to do, is that you have to appropriately challenge their thoughts.
Mhm.
You're like, really? Like, why do you like her? You
Gotcha.
know?
Okay.
Tell me that. Why do you like her?
Yeah.
What about her specifically do you like? Find out, is she being inappropriate? Is it inappropriately sexual? Listen to them because she might tell you, like, well, I saw that there are other lesbian friends, or
Mhm.
she might not use the word lesbian, but I saw Cindy also likes Rebecca too. You're like,
Right.
oh, that's what's happening. It's a social
Gotcha,
contagion. Got
gotcha.
it.
Alright.
So
I like
yeah,
it. I like it. So the wise dad here, the wisdom here is, don't freak out and panic, but
right.
also don't run with it, like, just be inquisitive and then go from there.
Yeah.
So I like it. I think that's fabulous advice, sir. Um, any last words before I close the show? Last advice
Uh,
to people.
if you don't have kids, I think there's a lot of propaganda
Mhm.
about having children, um, being like this thing. Oh, you got to give up your life, and like it's some sort of detrimental thing. It is the best thing of anything that you could give up your life for.
Mhm.
That thing that you wanted to do, it is so much more loving to sacrifice for somebody else, especially an innocent child.
Mhm.
So if your thing is like, well, I won't be able to do the things that I want to do 100% of the time, let me tell you, probably those things are not nearly as fulfilling as sacrificing your time, your effort, and your money for a child.
Mhm.
And and I'm saying this from a male perspective, often women are the ones who are allowed to say these things and feel
Mhm.
this way. But I feel that way as a guy. I feel that way as a man who's now, like I said, a 19-year-old. Um, I wouldn't have changed it. Matter of fact, I would say that my son helped me to mature
Mhm.
because I had to sacrifice, because I had to take risks. I had to do certain things for the betterment of him, not
Mhm.
necessarily for myself. And so I became a more conscious of the world, a more empathetic person, a better man
Mhm.
because of my son. Um, so despite the issues that I might have been having, my son kept me tethered to life.
Awesome. Where can people find you? Sorry, I was looking. There's a lot of windows here. Where can people find you and follow you?
I have a Substack, adambcoleman.substack.com. My Twitter account at wrong_speak.
Mhm.
People can check out the Wrong Speak Substack as well,
Okay.
wrongspeak.substack.com. And as far as especially the Children We Left Behind, you can buy it off of Wrong Speak's website,
Mhm.
wrongspeak.net, or they can buy it at their favorite retailer, Amazon, wherever they want. The audiobook is available. It should be on Audible soon, but it
Okay.
is on all the other audiobook platforms.
Gotcha. So it is wrongspeak.net.
Yep,
Okay.
wrongspeak.net. Yep.
That's what I was just looking at because I saw the comment and they were like, "Hey, how do we find him? How do we follow him?" And I looked at I was like, "I think it's wrongspeak.com." And I looked it up and I was like, .net. And I was like, "Wait a minute. Is this the right one?" I didn't want to give out somebody else's stuff on when we're
Yeah.
talking. So go to wrongspeak.net, folks. That's where you can find all of Adam's material, his books and everything. Go give him a follow. Great guy. Adam,
Thank you.
thank you so much for joining me today. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think it was awesome. Definitely a fellow Liberty dad for sure, as many, most, maybe all of the dads that have been on this show. So, with that, I'm going to put you backstage. If you need to go, that's cool, but I'm going to close out the show.
Thank you.
So,
God
yes,
bless.
sir. All right, folks, thank you so much for joining me. And we will be back at it on Monday with another bill review. But for now, it is the weekend, so we got to head out. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Make sure that you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer my Rumble channel, you can go to youtube.libertydad.com or you can go to rumble.libertydad.com. While you are there, let me know how I'm doing by leaving me a comment. You can also become part of the community by heading over to libertydad.locals.com. Remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time. But for now, I'm out.